All right, now I'd like to welcome to the show my friend Ed Hudgins, founder of the Human Achievement Alliance, among many other professional accomplishments. Welcome to Free the Economy, Ed.
Hey, glad to be here.
All right, so we've got a lot of exciting stuff to talk about, optimistic stuff about new technology and frontiers and opportunities. But let's start quick by telling everyone about your current project and professional roost, the Human Achievement Alliance.
Yes. Well, I created the Human Achievement Alliance about 5 years ago when COVID hit. Um, I went ahead and started up. I've been working for the Heartland Institute, another great organization, I'm sure you know. In the past, I worked for Heritage when it was free market. I worked for Cato, the Atlas Society, Joint Economic Committee, and I had my office for a lot of that time in the CEI suite with the great Fred Smith. So I
Mhm.
consider myself, in the sense, part of CEI going way, way back. But the Human Achievement Alliance, our idea is that technology in infotech, biotech, nanotech, robotics, AI especially, is in the process of transforming our world, transforming the economy, social organizations, public policy, and culture. If it's led by innovators and entrepreneurs in the private sector, we can have a future of unimagined prosperity with people literally living to 100 or 120 in good health. That's how profound this revolution is going to be. However, if it's run by governments, if it's controlled by governments, or if the people doing it are following the sort of the postmodernist notions that everything is relative and so forth and so on, then we can literally have dystopia. And so what I'm doing is forming alliances with groups, with technologists, with the people who are literally working to end aging. I'm forming coalitions with them so that they can hook up with free market advocates like the folks at competitive enterprise institutes and other places, to bring about this world changing revolution. It's going to be as profound as the Industrial Revolution. I also, by the way, have been drafted to be the executive director of a group called Humanity Plus. And Humanity Plus was one of the first so-called transhumanist organizations.
Mhm.
And we don't usually use a lot of that word a whole lot, but the idea was, this is a philosophy going back to about 1990, Max Moore and Natasha Vita-More. And the idea is that technology um, can enhance us as individuals, as human beings. I mean, it's not just a matter of eyeglasses, I can see you there, and hearing aids and things like that, but even more important things. For example, respites you could put in your lungs so that if you have a lung disease, not only can you breathe now, but you can probably run a marathon, without breaking a sweat. I mean, these are the kind of transformations we're talking about, or plant brain implants that can not only overcome people who have locked-in syndrome or maybe Alzheimer's and things like that, but can actually help you download information into your brain. That's how profound the revolution could be. So I'm working with the Human Achievement Alliance as well. I'm doing a lot of work on Capitol Hill and with other organizations, but this idea of coalitions, and especially in education, that's my big thing right now, is we have to transform the schooling system, which has been outdated for a century, into a truly education system for individuals. And we do that with technology.
All right. So a lot of what you're talking about seems to come along with some other stuff I've been reading about recently, sort of the thematics here about, traditionally we talk about like in politics, left wing versus right wing. So that goes, all the way
Mhm,
back to the, time
mhm,
of like the French Revolution when we divided the sort
mhm,
of progressive versus conservative type groups. But
mhm,
there's some people, these days, including our
mhm,
episode 43 guest, Jim Petskukis, who were talking about
mhm,
upwing views, upwing versus downwing, sort of being optimistic
mhm,
versus being pessimistic. And
mhm,
as you mentioned when we talked before, the phrase upwing actually goes back some decades, so that's
mhm,
something Jim is sort of reviving.
mhm,
But I really thought that was kind of a fascinating way of pivoting from, again, sort of left versus
mhm,
right to
Mhm.
This idea that that progress
Mhm.
is good.
Mhm.
We should encourage progress, and
Mhm.
similar to what again some other writers like Virginia Prostrel, for example, and she wrote
Yep.
the Future and Its Enemies back in the 1990s, when she
Mhm.
called the optimistic people the dynamists.
Yep.
Um, do you
Mhm.
what kind of potential do you think there is out there for shifting from left versus
Mhm.
right to sort of upwing
Mhm.
versus downwing?
Well, by the way, that phrase "upwing" goes back to some of the early transhumanists and people of that sort. And the idea was, just as you state, that left and right are kind of along a political spectrum. But upwing, the idea is that it transcends this division, and it's focusing really on the possibility of the future of breaking the current organizational blockades, you might say, and ways of thinking. And this is very important, looking at results, and not just, well, I'm going along with this ideology and someone else is on this other one. And I think this is where we have the opportunity to attract what I call honest liberals, or we consider ourselves classical liberals. And you see it, for example, I'm here in Maryland, you're right downtown in DC, just a little bit, a few miles from me. And if you look at Baltimore City, for example, or the District of Columbia, you see that they're basically mostly crime-ridden hellholes. You look at the schools, they've tried these policies for a half a century and they're not working. And what I'm seeing now is more people, sort of what you might call on the liberal or progressive side, saying, you know what, uh, this hasn't worked. We want to do things that work. But here's the thing, this is not well, let's go more right wing or left wing. I think it does require freedom and liberty, but it's the idea that it's going to transcend that, and it's going to use technology to transcend these sorts of systems. Education, by the way, especially, and we can go to into that a little bit later if you like, but I think that that's where upwing really, really applies, because it's breaking the whole century-old system of sage on a stage, one size fits all templates, assembly line. At 10 o'clock, everyone does math. At 11 o'clock, you do history and whatever. And that whole method is not the way kids really learn. I've got two 14-year-old daughters, and I can tell you in gory detail about how kids learn differently. So this is where, again, I think upwing transcends that left-right division.
And you talked about how all these ideas impact things like politics, but also culture. And this is again
Mhm.
something sort of Jim has talked about, and
Mhm.
it's sort of difficult to measure, but I think very easy to observe. The sort of cultural optimism you see in pop culture products like books, TVs, movies,
Mhm.
and now in social media,
Mhm.
where the perceived balance of stories about the future, are the stories about the future that we see in our culture generally positive, or are they generally sort of scary Black Mirror dystopian,
Mhm. Mhm.
negative images? And uh,
Yeah.
people, people who are sort of futurists, who are optimists, certainly think, um, even if the future stories aren't overwhelmingly negative, they should be more positive, right?
Yes.
And so
Mhm.
the 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 downstream effects of that, again, may be hard to measure, but I think are important.
Mhm.
How does that how does that the sort of pop culture
Mhm.
water we're swimming in
Mhm.
impact the
Mhm.
possibilities for the kind of stuff you want to see?
Yeah. Well, very good question, because I come from a generation that witnessed the moon landing. Um, and that was the big thing that was very optimistic. In fact, I worked at NASA Goddard in 1969 as a high school intern during Apollo 11. So, I mean, talk about a kid in a candy store,
Mhm.
and there was a whole generation that was not only influenced by that, but culturally influenced by Star Trek, the original series. It
Mhm.
was this optimistic view of the future where, of course, people had challenges. There were alien races and all. But on the Starship Enterprise, of course, you had blacks, you had Asians, you had, sort of every type of person. It was not that it was transcending the bigotry that was going on up into the 60s. And you saw that kind of optimism. You saw the 70s kind of getting into the anti-hero, and let's make pimps and prostitutes the heroes, not very good. And then you saw Star Wars come along. And it was a little bit different, a little bit mystical there with Obi-Wan Kenobi and the Jedi. But again, it was the hero's journey. And
Mhm.
so that influenced culture as well. Now, unfortunately, what's happened in the last couple of decades is you've had a swing in the wrong direction. The current Star Trek stuff, and especially the sequels to Star Wars, were just, pretty terrible in terms of culture, in terms of optimism versus pessimism. You saw, of course, a lot of the fear the Terminator stories, good story. But really influencing culture. And I can tell you right now, one of the defining attributes of our culture, sadly, and I see it in our schools right up here in Montgomery County, is you don't have heroes. You don't have teaching about what inspires you. I can tell you the books that my kids have to read sometimes. And so culture is absolutely important, but I'm hoping that with some of the changes we're seeing returning to optimism about technology, we're going to see more in art because that's what often gives people a vision of what is possible. It inspires their imagination. And it's interesting, there's one guilty pleasure movie I have from 1936, and it's called Things to Come by H.G. Wells. And H.G. Wells was a socialist, but the movie basically has, this is 1936, it has a world war breaking out in Europe. He's kind of ahead of his time, unfortunately, in that. Civilization being destroyed, and then you have the rise of the technocrats, almost like a dictatorship of technology, and rebuilding the world. And of course, obviously, I'm not a socialist, but you can kind of appreciate that vision that he put forward in 1936. So this is a very important area, and I hope more and more folks who are inspired by technology actually put out good stuff. You may have seen the movie. Let me see, a couple of movies recently were a kind of negative warnings. Transcendence was one that was kind of negative about technology and AI, and unfortunately, you still have those sort of things. Good movies, by the way, but just very, very negative.
Well, yeah, and the question I think one is interesting about how we look at not just sort of like fictional characters, but sort of the people all around us, and the concept of the heroic. So we can certainly imagine a literature class in college about the concept of the hero in fiction. A lot of
Hmm.
interesting things to be said about that. But then there's the concept, I think, the heroic in real life, where people go out and do
Hmm.
amazing things. And the question is, do we ever really think of them as heroes? Do we sort of appreciate the big achievements out there?
Hmm.
And there's famous people in every generation who are known for building companies, inventing technology, mainstreaming new products, and sometimes those people are celebrated for their accomplishments and even the sort of wealth they build from that. I think, but
Yep.
just as often they seem to be attacked simply because
Hmm.
they're successful, right? And so you
Yep.
think of the big, people who run giant tech companies and people, someone like Elon Musk, or people who are
Yep.
associated with sort of like um,
Hmm. Yep.
big financially successful companies and enterprises that
Yep.
are driven by technology.
Hmm.
Do you think the sort of demonization of the most successful among us
Hmm.
is that just simple envy and that there's nothing more to it than that, or is there something else going on? Do we just like taking pot shots at whoever's famous?
It's a very. I was looking for my copy of Jobs, the book, the biography of Steve Jobs, and he's to me a perfect example. Frankly, working for him apparently was difficult. He could be a real SOB, but guess what? You're looking at me right now on one of his products, and I've got one of them right here, and I got one of them right here, and and of course, we now have a lot of other great organizations. You have Samsung that does great stuff, and so forth. You have Musk, who's of course he's the way the International Space Station is supplied now is by a private company. Um, but I think there's two parts here. Part of it is indeed this notion of envy. Ayn Rand, by the way, was the best on this issue. She defined envy as hatred of the good for being the good. If it's one thing to say, here's a business person who's prospered only because they got government handouts or they've got trade protection, which unfortunately Trump does not understand anything about trade, I'm sad to say. Um, and it's one thing to say, I don't like this business person because they've essentially stolen. They've restricted liberty, and that's how they're getting rich, extortion racket. It's quite another thing to say it's because they worked their butts off and they created a great organization. Amazon, for example, we just got an Amazon package out my door here. My wife is going to pick it up. Um, that's envy. It's this deep, very, very ugly emotion. That's not, I don't want everyone to rise. It's, I want to take and pull people down. I'd rather pull everybody down than to have this person prosper. When you think about it, over 90% of people in this country have a smartphone, a modern smartphone. And whether you get an Apple or a Samsung or a Pixel, whatever it is, these are like hundreds, if not more times powerful than the first ones that came out in 2007 when Steve Jobs introduced these things. And everybody, people on the construction sites out here, immigrants, even the poorest people can afford one now, right? So shouldn't we be celebrating the creators because they've created? But the envious people are like, I'd rather pull these guys down and punish them for their virtues.
Mm.
Let's tax the rich, that whole thing. And again, it's something that we've seen in this country for many, many decades. It's just that it's getting worse. I think in one sense, mass communication has allowed this poison, this toxicity to spread. I mean, we now have a situation where New York City, the font of capitalism, is about to elect an anti-Semitic commie mayor. And if you want to take a look at college campuses, right after October 7th, one of the worst massacres we've seen, graphically photographed, celebrated in the streets, you saw it celebrated on college campuses. That should really scare everybody. And again, you see that hatred of the good for being the good on our college campuses. And that's why I say an education revolution is going to be the ultimate revolution to turn things around.
So, when I read about technology and AI and education these days, I see a lot of sort of, doomers, like negative takes on it, which is like college undergraduates, they're all, cheating on their assignments with AI, and
Yeah.
they're not supposed to be using
Yeah.
them, or even like, high
Mm-hmm.
school students, or
Mm-hmm.
there was one interesting recent article I mentioned in a previous episode about how teachers are complaining about students using AI, but then the teachers themselves are using AI to grade to grade assignments at the
Yes.
same time. Um, so there, there's definitely skepticism there, but then
Mhm.
there also just like I assume the angle you're coming at it from, that there's enormous possibilities
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
reform education, to individualize instruction
Yes. Mhm.
with AI tools in a way that's not really possible. It's not
Mhm.
possible to give every sort of student a private tutor, but it
Right.
is potentially
Mhm.
possible to give every student a private AI tutor.
Correct. Yeah, I'll mention, by the way, with my Humanity Plus hat on, if your listeners go to humanityplus.org, it's a .org, and then go to, it's called a director's drop or something. It's where I do my little short pieces. I just did a piece called Artificial Intelligence Eating Your Homework. And because when we went to parents' night at my school, when it just started out, we went to every class that our daughters were going to be attending, and the teacher gave us a little talk about here's what we're doing in this class and so forth. And a lot of them brought up AI. The Spanish teacher said she doesn't give homework anymore because she knows that it's going to be done not just with AI, but just looking everything up. One of the teachers said, well, instead of having them do their essays at home, I have them do it in class. And what I do is I kind of monitor as they go along. So I'll look at the first draft and say, well, you need a little bit of difference here and there and change this and go through it that way, which is a sort of a good thing. I think it was a biology teacher said, I'm able to spot the very clunky AI speak when I look at something on paper. And so you do have this challenge, but you had this a few decades ago when people could go on the internet and look anything up, right?
Hmm.
Um, and what you're going to see, but the whole thing is that we're thinking of the education system the way it has been for a century. And it was literally created in the 1920s as an assembly line system to, give kids just enough. And yes, we tweak it now so we have honors classes and things like that. But what you're going to see in the future, what we have to work on in the future, is to merge technology with not only in the curriculum of education, but the way we teach. There's a reason why the co-founders of Google and the founder of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, and the founder of Wikipedia were Montessori students. The Montessori approach is individualized approach where it's not a sage on the stage, but they give kids the freedom to experiment and so forth. This book I mentioned to you earlier, Rewiring Education by John Couch. John Couch was employee number 54 at Apple, became their vice president for education. This is a really good book where he talks about it's not just, having everybody get an iPad. That's nice, but it's about how we teach students. It has to be individualized. And because I think it was Peter Diamandis in his book Abundance, which everybody should look at as well, talks about how half the students in a classroom are bored stiff because it's too easy, and the other half are basically completely lost because you're teaching to this fictional medium. And so I think what you can see in the future, and especially with parental choice, you're going to have more parents saying, hey, we want an option instead of the government schools. So you're going to hopefully see these private efforts scaling up, and not just scaling up so that you don't get indoctrinated, kids don't get indoctrinated, but integrating AI and all of the technologies into education. We have to, first of all, our kids have to learn about it because you hear all the horror stories and all the challenges of AI. Well, how are our kids going to deal with it if they don't understand it? So they have to understand technology. They have to read about the great people, Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or whoever you want, the entrepreneurs. And we have to use it, as you say, to customize, have an AI that can teach my daughters. And then you have a teacher who can help as a mentor. Yes.
Well, yeah, and I think this is kind of an example of the upwing versus downwing view, kind of
Hmm.
scrambling the previous assumptions about progressive
Hmm.
versus conservative or left versus right. When it comes to education choice, there was a
Hmm.
time, probably when I was growing up, where the if you were someone who didn't like the standard government school system and you wanted sort of more freedom, you were
Hmm.
likely a hippie. You were likely
Hmm.
a left-wing person who would have said
Hmm.
exactly what you said, which is that, this education system was designed decades ago to produce conformity and to, make
Hmm.
people uh,
Hmm.
kind of agreeable little cogs in the modern
Yes.
industrial state, and
Yep.
and so it was sort of like the
Mhm.
hippie moms who were most
Yes.
wanted
Hmm.
homeschooling and options to the normal
Hmm.
public schools.
Yes.
Now we're in a very different sort of cultural and political moment, and now it's more
Yeah.
sort of right-wing parents who are like they think the schools are too left-wing, and they're not
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
they're not worried about
Hmm.
conformism
Right.
as much as they are about,
Hmm.
wokeism or whatever.
Right.
But that ultimately, it doesn't really
Hmm.
matter
Yeah.
whether your concerns
Hmm.
are schools are too left
Hmm.
wing or too right wing or too conformist or
Yes.
too wild and
Hmm.
crazy. It's
Hmm.
parental choice and opportunity, which
Yeah.
gives
Mhm.
everyone the chance to express the values they think are most important with
Exactly.
their family.
Yeah. I'll add another example. You're right, absolutely right. One of the things we finally see catching on in this country is apprenticeships. Now, apprenticeship is different from an intern who basically goes into a nonprofit or a company and they Xerox stuff and just do menial stuff. An apprenticeship is where you go in for the Switzerland. 70% of kids in Switzerland go through an apprenticeship. It's a learn and earn situation where they might spend half of their day in the high school classroom and then the other half literally in one of 200 and some professions. Finance, it can be being a plumber. Lord knows we need more of those, right? It can be to any kind of technology. There are 200 categories. 70% of Swiss kids go through that, where only 5% of American kids go through an apprenticeship. We're starting to see a move in the direction. There's a group called CareerWise Colorado that promotes the Swiss model. It was co-founded by then Governor Heckenlooper of Colorado. He's now the senator from Colorado. I heard him speak at the American Enterprise Institute late last year. And this is an area where, and by the way, it was the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, Labor Department, that issued regulations to liberalize who could set up apprenticeships. It was backed by labor unions, and it was backed by conservatives and libertarians. And Governor Heckenlooper, now Senator Heckenlooper, was one of the pioneers of this. So is that right wing or is it left wing? No, it's upwing. And that's happening right now. Even in leftist Montgomery County, where I'm sitting here right now, there was a Board of Education member who is very interested in this, and they're starting to look seriously at how to expand apprenticeships. We got 100 of the best biotech companies on earth right up and down the I-270 corridor. They're desperate for trained people. And here we have this county that's spending a ton of money on education. They should be hooking up. There's upwing for you.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and so some of these policies, some of the goals we're looking at, would require affirmative policies, saying, "Well, we need to put this thing in place." But I think what we've talked about a lot on the show is that for a lot of the goals that we have, what we need is a repeal of things, right? We need to take policies that are currently on the books and get rid of them, whether they are their laws or their regulations. And so this goes back to our old friend, the late Fred Smith, rest in peace, where he says, he said basically about how economies grow. We don't need to teach the grass to grow. We just need to move the rocks off the lawn. And
very good.
And that's a sort of folksy way of saying that, we can deregulate to stimulate when it comes to both economic growth and, technology adoption in general.
Yep.
So I'm wondering where you think the sort of highest value deregulations would potentially be. Because I know we just talked recently to Alex Trembath at the Breakthrough Institute. He was talking about the abundance movement, and one of their top things is housing abundance. And so, in order to get more housing, you need to get rid of a bunch of heavy-handed local zoning regulations all across the country. But obviously, that there's some of these big topics where instead of having to do it in 100 cities, you could just do it once at the federal level. Where do we deregulate first, Ed?
Okay, well, I'll give you two or three areas. First of all, of course, education, and this is where we see parental choice really starting to grow. We saw in Texas recently, and I think Florida has expanding theirs a bit now. This is the first, because if you give people, if you give parents the money now, it's not that now the education people have to listen to them because they got alternatives. That's, I think, one of the places that we can put our efforts if you want to really leverage. A second place is healthcare. Again, and I've done a lot of work in this area, and I think I've done some stuff for CEI back in the day on healthcare. Right now, there are three or four major things that are keeping us literally from living to 100 years old and in health. And it's that the fact is that the rocks are on the grass or on the ground. The Food and Drug Administration takes on average 10 to 12 years at a cost of $3 billion to bring a new product from research lab to you. That's not just the FDA, but it's the development process. But it's the FDA that really is the barrier. And I've been in hearings. I've worked on legislation where you have people in the audience whose children have died because there was a product that was in test. It was already proven to be safe. But, well, maybe there's a small chance you could get cancer. And I was like, yeah, but my child's going to die. So FDA reform, reforming the delivery system, that's an area where we really have some opportunities. And again, the third is artificial intelligence. The Trump administration recently released a really good document on AI. And here's the problem. Right now, there are about 1,000 AI regulatory bills at the state level, and most of them are pretty bad. Okay. And AI, of course, is going to be at the foundations of all of this progress. For example, AI is doing incredible research, incredible discoveries in healthcare that doctors can't make and that researchers can't make, and AI can do it very, very quickly. Okay. So AI is crucial. And if you have 1,000 different regulations all over the place, well, you're basically killing the innovators. And so the administration came out with a pretty good document. I have some differences, but you can take a look at that AI document, and it's very, very optimistic if you look at the preamble of the document. And so that's the third area where I think you really should focus. And if you're listening to me in a different one of your different states, then make sure your state doesn't kill what's going to revolutionize our world.
Well, yeah, and if we can, there's a couple strategies here. One, to move the rocks off the lawn and deregulate to stimulate.
Mhm.
And if we, repeal some of like the restrictions that are keeping
Mhm.
um, job creators and innovators from moving forward, then that will create
Yeah,
an opportunity.
yeah,
There's another theory, and we could sort of like wrap up here on the biggest
sure.
picture kind of possibility for optimism, which is, some people, whether they're technologists, they're libertarians, they're anarchists, they're objectivist people who have said, with the increasingly fast-moving technology,
Mhm.
it's theoretically possible that the technology will just move faster than governments and regulation can keep up with, even if
Mhm.
even if they're trying to hold
Mhm.
it back, and
Yeah.
that like we'll be living on Mars in an
Mhm.
anarcho-communist, anarcho-syndicalist, anarcho-capitalist, commune
Mhm. Right.
before the
Mhm.
UN will never catch up with us, right?
That's
Because
right.
they're slow and kludgy. And
That's right.
what how much sort of stock do you take in that, even just as a potential very long-term big picture thing? Is it possible to innovate
Mhm.
around government because government
Mhm.
is too slow and clumsy to keep up with the
Mhm.
smartest people?
Yes. Well, one of my good friends, and I just saw him a couple of weeks ago testify on Capitol Hill about AI, is Adam Thierer. And he's at R Street, as you know. And Adam has a book called Permissionless Innovation. And Charles Murray had a similar book, and I just can't remember the title right now, but your listeners can look it up, where they suggest something along those lines. One of the reasons why, you know, we all kind of have these things now is because you didn't have, no one even thought these things were possible. So Steve Jobs could just say, I'm going to do this damn thing, and I don't care if anybody likes it or not. Who cares? They did it in the garage. That's one of the, sort of symbols of American innovation is that HP, Hewlett Packard, Apple, and a number of these places started in somebody's garage. And fortunately, the regulators didn't come along and say, well, you're disobeying labor rules and you're disobeying safety rules and so forth. They just did it. Okay. Um, the thing is, and so I take that, and I'm hoping that technology can do that, but I do fear that a lot of the regulations are so deep in some of these areas, especially healthcare, that it's just very, very difficult. I mean, I hope that we're on Mars in the next decade or two. I'd love to go there and check it out myself, frankly. But I see it as a mixed thing. I see that there are areas where we can probably innovate around government, and then there are going to be areas where we really have to bump our heads. But this is where breaking the current organizational system is really good. I want to suggest again to your readers who want to kind of stretch their minds. Um, ChatGPT MD is by it's co-authored by uh, here we go, by Robert Pearl, who was the CEO of Kaiser Permanente, so, worked in this area, and his co-author is ChatGPT. What he does is very interesting. He talks about how the three companies that may be doing the healthcare revolution are CBS, Amazon, and and one of the other Walmart and
Mhm.
Walgreens, because they are buying up small doctors' offices. They offer their own insurance. They're partnering with insurers. They're offering, if you go into any CVS now, pharmacy, they have mini clinics there now. And of course, these are organizations that know how to deliver to customers. They know how to coordinate and get things done very quickly, as opposed to bureaucrats. Now, they're going to bump into a lot of regulatory stuff, but there's an area where you're going to see innovation coming from places you never would imagine. You think, well, they're going to come from a big hospital or a big whatever, but guess what? It might not be. It might not be that. So I call your attention, your readers' attention to this. I was going to show a quick slide here. There's one of the other things you have that's in a sense what you're talking about, getting around the government regulations, um, is these concierge um, um, boutique clinics. And I just visited one in Florida. I'm trying to find the photo of it here, um, uh, where you basically go in. Now, right now, they're very expensive. So, like Fountain Life, which was co-founded, by the way, by Peter Diamandis, they have like five or six locations now, and the minimum is $10,000, which people can't afford, most of them. But you go in there, and they literally go through and do every kind of imaginable a study of you. They do an MRI, they do a CAT scan, they do blood work, they do, pretty much you name it, they do it. And in fact, they're trying to get me some statistics on this. There we go. There's me in front of their location in Orlando, Florida. And first of all, one of the things that's interesting is they're finding a lot of pre-symptomatic ailments that you would not find until suddenly, oh my God, I have cancer. Oh my God, I have heart situations. That's the first thing, is that they're finding these things. And then the idea is we want to keep you healthy. And they basically provide boutique service, to you because they've done every single test imaginable. And now one of the problems that's a regulatory problem is most people, for example, if you're on Medicare, you can't use your Medicare insurance to access their services. So you have a lot of these regulations about where you can use, or a health savings account. So we'd have to have some changes there. But here they're actually saying we're not going to wait around. We're going to provide a boutique service. Hopefully, like every other technology, the price will start to go down as people are more allowed to use their money for this kind of thing. And so there you have another revolution going around the current system.
All right, fantastic. And that's already on the ground and moving forward.
Yeah.
Um, well, this has been a great conversation about optimism and opportunity, and hopefully we've inspired people to explore more about upwing thinking and
Yes.
and the chances that we have for a better society in the future. So before we
Mhm.
go, Ed, tell everyone
Mhm.
where they can find all your valuable and important work online.
Ah, okay. Well, www.humanachievementalliance.org. And my email is ehudgins, Hudgins, at humanachievementalliance.org. And you can also find some of my materials on humanityplus.org. And by the way, part of my whole thing with the Human Achievement Alliance is to make coalitions, to work with people, not just here in Washington, the wonderful people at CEI, but locally. So if you're listening to me somewhere else in the country and you're interested on the ground in working on education transformation or any of these things, get in touch with me. I can't
Mhm.
travel to all 50 states, very easily. So please email me, text me, do whatever. And I want to work with everybody out there because this is the future. We are going to make a transformation as dramatic as the Industrial Revolution if we are allowed to and if we have the liberty to do it.
All right, excellent. The future is now. Thanks for being with us, Ed.
Thank you.